Hi everyone, I'm Jay. Hope you're having a good day. So I'm coming here to talk about Thymeleaf and upgrading from Thymeleaf 2 to Thymeleaf 3 and just things that we learned when we did it, and then also just features between the two versions. This is more relevant now that I know that Spring Boot 2 is targeting Thymeleaf 3, so there's not a ton of migrations, but it depends on how much custom stuff you've done, so we'll get right into it. So to start off, my company is Broadleaf Commerce. We're a Spring e-commerce open source framework. We have enterprise features like order management system, content management system, multi-tenant, single schema, and then some of our clients at the Container Store, the Buckle, and O'Reilly Auto Parts. And our main focus is really just being customizable and flexible and scalable for the most part. So normally high-end clients. Or large enterprise clients, sorry. Not sure if everyone's familiar with Thymeleaf, but if you're not, it's an open source server-side Java templating language. You pretty much write pure HTML for the most part. No special tag libs really or anything like that. You just tag attributes, tag names, some special templating in there, but for the most part, it's pretty much just HTML. You can write HTML5. It all pretty much validates. So one of the big reasons a lot of people use it, especially in Spring apps, is there's a lot of nice Spring integrations. Actually inside the Thymeleaf repository on GitHub is a Thymeleaf Spring 4. I believe there's going to be a Thymeleaf Spring 5 integration for Thymeleaf. It also uses Spell. You can also use OGNL if you want. I haven't used OGNL. I've only used Spell so far with Thymeleaf. Since the creator of Thymeleaf is from Spain, and because a lot of it's pretty Spring-based, it's full IE10 support, and another thing is it's highly customizable, so lots of different tag libs of sorts, and then just a lot of caching and other properties you can configure. So into the slightly more fun stuff. So the first feature I like to go over is some advanced fragment expressions that have been iterated on since the previous features on in Thymeleaf 2. So the expressions is fairly similar. You have the tilde bracket syntax in Thymeleaf 2. Traditionally, you didn't really use it. You would use something like the second bullet there where it says home : the fragment name. Now in Thymeleaf 3, technically that expression gets wrapped inside of the tilde and the bracket, but for backwards compatibility, you don't have to do that in Thymeleaf 3, so that the HTML upgrade's really easy. It's actually completely backwards compatible, so nothing that changes there. The real big change in it, though, is that the fragments are really first-class citizens of sorts, meaning they can be used as variables inside conditionals, even as parameters, which I'll show in a couple of slides. So here's a couple of use cases of the new fragments. The first one is just the basic syntax, just the tilde bracket. And then the second one here is how we'd use a th insert. Like I said before, you wouldn't usually, but in Thymeleaf 2, you wouldn't usually normally use the tilde bracket syntax. And then if you do leave off that, it still works. The third here is using fragments inside of a conditional. Believe it or not, in Thymeleaf 2, I don't think this was possible. Just because of how they were parsed out. And then the last example here is a little bit of a special way of doing things where you're actually setting a fragment as a conditional, as a variable, though technically it's not really a fragment of sorts because you're saying go to the footer, give me the tag that has the ID main, and then give me the text from that div, and then save that in a frag, the variable frag, sorry. And then insert that into a paragraph tag. So much more powerful use cases of fragments. One that I'm excited about is by being able to use parameters inside your fragment expressions, you've pretty much eliminated needing any kind of layout dialect. At Broadleaf, we use one called the layout dialect. And what that really does is you're able to use a base template that gives you a header, a footer, your head, your foot, and then some basic body templating. Now with actually supporting parameters like this, you don't really need a third-party dialect anymore to handle that because you can have something like this. This is your base.html, and there could be more in this fragment or on this template or just this, but here's the example of like your base head. The fragment's called common header and has two parameters, title and links. as you can see in that first tag right there, that title, th replace title, so that's going to use that title tag. There's some caveats here and there with it being null and stuff like that. I'd probably suggest just kind of looking into it a little bit to know the caveats, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward, and a lot of times you'll be sending a title tag in this case. Then we have awesomeapp.css, which is going to be on every single page, codebase.js, every single page, and then favicon and that stuff. And at the bottom there, it says th replace links, so you're able to pretty much send other CSS files and JavaScript files, favicon, all that stuff that you want in the head of your file. So the second here is a kind of a use case of that. So here's main.html, and then we have a head tag. It says th replace. So it goes to the base template, it grabs the common header out of it, and then uses the syntax afterwards. I'm not really sure how familiar everybody is with this kind of syntax, but the tilde, colon, the name. So that's a selector. You could do selector similar to this in Thymeleaf 2, I believe for the most part. But in Thymeleaf 3, this is saying inside this file, give me either the fragment name title, but if there's no fragment name title, go ahead and give me the first tag or tag's name title. And the next one's the same concept, but with links. So it's going to send me both those links. And it's going to actually send those as parameters to the common header fragment. So our resulting main.html, you would never really see this because it's going to get parsed out and everything. But this is effectively the equivalent at this point, where you have a head title with awesome main, the same CSS, same favicon, same JavaScript, and then your additional CSS at the bottom of the page. So I think this is really powerful. That's why I went first on it. This is one thing I want to get Broadleaf specifically actually using instead of the layout dialect, just for performance reasons. The next is decoupled templating. From this first slide, you're asking probably, this is the exact same as normal templating, you're right. So take this for example, this normal template that we would normally write to maybe put users in a table of sorts. And then take this next slide. So this is just something that like a front-end developer would write, just normal HTML. And we have 2 rows here just because it looks prettier on the page. And then your actual templating gets pulled out of this now into its own file. It's a th.xml file. I personally haven't played too much with this yet. It's a little awkward in my opinion, especially because Thymeleaf is so easy to learn. You typically just, we have a lot of clients, so we just teach them how to write templates, but I don't want to go too deep into this because it's kind of weird, but you basically have selectors. You're saying give me the table, or not even table, it gives me the ID user table. Remove everything inside of that except for the first tag, which is the first TR. We grab that first row, and then for each user, we create a new row, print out the username, and then print out, it looks like an enum with some string concatenation. So it's not the prettiest in the world, but I mean, if you really want this, you want front-end developers to actually write HTML itself, and you want to leave the templating to somebody else and completely keep that decoupled, then this is actually supported now in Thymeleaf 3. So here's some additional features that I thought were notable. The first one is the inline expressions. If you recall, in Thymeleaf 2, you had th inline equals text, and then you could use that kind of goofy looking bracket syntax. It turns out no one uses bracket syntax in normal HTML, so having to specify to be able to use that was sort of redundant. So I went ahead and stripped out the th inline equals text requirement. You can just use the bracket wherever, and it'll evaluate Thymeleaf inside those 2 brackets. The next one's kind of a weird one. It's called textual template mode. It's the ability to write Thymeleaf templating without actual tags. This is pretty much the equivalent to using th blocks, but without using th blocks. I don't really see a whole lot in it, but it's a little bit interesting. The next is no more dependencies on servlet API, so you can run this outside of a web container. And broadly specifically, we run templates inside of a servlet container, so it's not a huge deal for us, but I could definitely see the advantage of that. The last one is there is some improved integrations with different reactive frameworks, mostly just being able to do engine throttling, being able to partially execute templates, and to be able to respond to back pressure. So the next one's a parser change. This one I think is a pretty big deal for the most part, mostly because trying to parse HTML with an XML parser is not a whole lot of fun. You have weird stuff, like I want to have a self-closing script tag, but I don't actually, not a script tag, but any self-closing things like an image, something like that, I don't want to put the / at the end of it. Well, too bad you have to, because that's XML. Great thing about Thymeleaf 3, it no longer uses an XML parser anymore. Uses something called auto parser. It was actually written by the same guy that wrote Thymeleaf, so obviously a lot of performance increases by going to this parser as well, since it was written with Thymeleaf in mind. This is great because now you have full HTML5 support and you don't have weird SAX errors everywhere on random stuff. There's one little caveat with this, which it was really weird and took me a long time, not a long time, but a little bit of time to find. So in some of our templates, we had things like this, a self-closing div with th text. This was fine in Thymeleaf 2, regardless of what text was. In Thymeleaf 3, this is fine if text is not null. If text is non-null or is null in Thymeleaf 3, this results in a self-closing div tag. That gets sent to the browser. The browser goes, I don't know what a self-closing div tag is. I guess it's an open tag, and then sort of arbitrarily finds where it wants the close tag to go. This can mess with your templating quite a lot. So it was very odd whenever I did the original upgrade. Everything was kind of mixed around. This happened to be the problem. It's a really easy fix. Go figure, just go write HTML that's valid. So at that point, everything works. So on to the slightly less fun part, but here's the beginning of different API changes between 2 and 3. The first one is the spell variable expression evaluator. So in Thymeleaf 2, you would return a string to object map. This is the, if you recall, the $ hash, and then you would use a name dot, a method name you would use, some sort of reflection to call that object. And that first piece right after the hash is the string part of this, and then the object is the actual class that would be called the methods on. So it's pretty straightforward. The API I never thought was that bad. I thought it was pretty decent. A little bit of changes in Thymeleaf 3. Instead of returning a map, we pretty much just return the key set, and then we do a lookup on that map, return the object separately. Not a huge lot of difference. It's pretty much the same. So slightly different API, but it's pretty much set up the exact same way. And then HTML, like I said previously, using those expressions, identical. I put down some links to our Thymeleaf stuff. Everything in Broadleaf that regards to Thymeleaf and all that is open source. Here's to git.io links. Note that after the capital T, that's capital I. It's very hard to see. And that goes for everything with this Thymeleaf stuff. We implemented Thymeleaf 2 and Thymeleaf 3 at the same time in Broadleaf, so depending on what you have, it'll auto pretty much pull in what you need. So we have examples of pretty much how to implement most things in Thymeleaf and most customizations. So onto the dialects. So this is an example of the I dialect in Thymeleaf 2. Return get prefix. So in Thymeleaf, this is th. In Broadleaf, we use BLC. Processors, so this is your normal I processors, anything you're doing custom. In Thymeleaf, it's like th text, thu text, and various other things like that. Execution attributes. This one's kind of weird. In Broadleaf, we typically only returned a magic string map to our expression object factory. I don't know any other use cases. And then the last two, I honestly don't really particularly know. Like we usually just return the defaults from the abstract dialect. Here's Thymeleaf 3. So this is a little bit more modular. This is the equivalent really. So you have to extend the abstract processor dialect saying that I have processors. There's also a abstract preprocessor dialect and an abstract post-processor dialect and a bunch of other ones. And then implements I expression object dialect. That means that I have variable expressions, which is the same thing Thymeleaf 2 is object factory. In my opinion, this is a little bit more obvious and more modular. So you have get name, get prefix. This means slightly less in Thymeleaf 3 because all the mapping to know like th colon text, that th part is actually inside the processor. Name and prefix, as far as I know, is more of a song and dance. I would just set them to the same just for sanity. Get dialect processor precedence. It's just the precedence of your dialect if you have multiple and they have the same prefix name. Get processors. This is a little different because you can actually return processors with different prefixes, and then this will actually ask you, hey, given this prefix, what processors do you have for it? So this kind of eliminates the need for having a lot of dialects. You can just have one really. And then get expression object factory, much more straightforward. It just returns the object factory. There's no some weird magic string. You just return the object factory itself. This is pretty much a outline of what I've already said, but figured it made more sense in the last slides. As before, here's some links to our implementations of both of these if you just need to see some examples. So onto the processors. So this is where a lot of the actual changes were in the API. The processor API for Thymeleaf 2, in my opinion, was kind of all over the place. Thymeleaf 3 was rewritten. It's a lot better now. So here's the base I processor. As get matcher basically tells me what node to execute this on, and process, just go do some work. It's very straightforward. You really don't have a lot of classes to choose from. You have abstract element processor, abstract adder processor. Attribute means you did it on the attribute, that's a th text. And then you have something like element processor, which is normally something like a th block. So not a whole lot of modularity. Pretty much got to catch them all sort of processors. Thymeleaf 3 gets way more modular, way more broken down. iProcessor, just very stripped down, just a template mode. What do we run on XML, HTML, et cetera. The precedence of when this iProcessor runs. You'll notice that with like th text and other processors that run at a really low priority. Th block is another one that runs at a really low priority. And then you have element processor. It's pretty much the basic, like I am processing a element tag. And this has a get matching element name and attribute name. So you can set both of them, one of them, sort of. This pretty much determines if it's an attribute or it's the actual tag name that you're looking for. So you have element tag processor. So this is already a difference. So element tag processor says I want a processor, but I only want to move around with tags. I don't want to actually deal with the body of the tags at all. And then element model processor, that's the actual model, that's the template, you're actually doing changes on the model itself. You'll see a lot of differences in the arguments here. You have a structure handler and a model itself and template context. Can't really go through all of these in super detail. The short answer is structure handler is beautiful. Everything makes way more sense than it did before. For example, structure handler has like a parse expression, whereas in Thymeleaf 2, some weird casting with arguments and having to pass a bunch of stuff around, it was really abstract. But this is a much more clean, more straightforward API with the structure handlers. Here's some other interfaces that are available. We'll go over all of them. They're all pretty self-explanatory for the most part. And they all have their own structure handlers as well. All those structure handlers work slightly differently, which helps kind of mitigate what you can do in those processors. Kind of makes it a little bit cleaner and makes you write better code naturally because of just the API limitations. So here's some main differences. Thymeleaf 2, like I said, get matcher. Now it's pretty much more granular API is the difference. Before, the only difference was get matcher. Whatever you said match, that was pretty much what you just worked on, which could be anything. So abstract processors could do anything pretty much, which is the Wild West. Pretty much the bullet there is you can just do whatever. But the main thing, in my opinion, is really the arguments versus the structure handler. The structure handler is a much easier API to use. So some basic configuration. So here is just the Maven POM itself, Thymeleaf 309 release, pretty straightforward. Spring 4, odds are this is pretty much the same as it was before in your app, except it was probably 2.15, 2.16, something like that. And then some slightly differences in the Java config. So a view resolver, that's still pretty much identical. Not a whole lot of changes with there. Just this entire first part of this configuration file is fairly identical. Moving down, with the template engine, this changed a little bit. You have the Spring template engine, which is slightly different. You can set the Spring EL compiler to true. I've never set this, don't really know if it matters, to be honest. It still worked without setting. I think the default might be true. And then the template resolvers, this is one of the main differences. It's very simple, but you have the Spring Resource template resolver. Previously, you used to have the servlet, and you had the class path template resolver. If you're using a Spring app, you're pretty much just going to use the Spring Resource template resolver, and just setting the prefix with /webinf or class path : / for your class path stuff. So it's pretty simple in general. And I didn't put a slide up here for the template resolvers. They are extremely similar. There's not a whole lot of changes, but if you have any, those will need to be migrated because the APIs have changed slightly. So in summary, not a whole lot to upgrade unless you have a lot of processors. Broadleaf has on the numbers of 50 or 60, 70 processors. We've pretty much covered most things, so pretty much everything migrated pretty well. The only thing to look out for is we did some kind of bad practices of actually setting global variables inside processors. It's pretty much a no-no. In Thymeleaf 3, this becomes more hard. I still worked around it by setting it on the request itself, but in general, it's not really supported. But other than that, everything else is pretty straightforward. So some new features, better fragment expressions. You can do a lot more with them. Decouple templating, putting your front end different from what your templating actually does to that front end. Better performance. This has a lot to do with the parser change more than anything else. And again, with the parser change, no more XML, so that's nice. And then, in my opinion, all the APIs, they're a lot more sleek now. Plus, you have the addition of pre-processors and post-processors. Instead of just the processors from before, you can actually process before any of the normal processors, and then you can process after all the processors. Gives you a little bit more granular, just changes to the template in general. So here's some resources. The first one is the migration. This is what I used religiously doing the upgrade. It's really simple. He has a lot of links to GitHub. He pretty much did all his issue tracking with epics and everything through GitHub. Everything's really well documented. And then an extension guide that I didn't even find until writing this presentation, so I did the entire upgrade without it. It would have been way more helpful to have this because it's very detailed and makes a lot of sense. Here's my blog. I wrote this about a year ago when I did the upgrade. Goes kind of in detail on how Broadleaf was able to do backwards compatibility, a lot of Spring auto injection, and just a lot of smart hooking up stuff. It's kind of interesting. We kind of created our own middle layer to delegate, so we only had to write our processors once, even though they work with both versions of Thymeleaf. And then, if you sat here this whole time and don't know what Thymeleaf is, I did a presentation a year ago explaining stuff about it, so here's a link to that, to the slides. It's pretty much just an introduction through Thymeleaf and how to use it and some just real basic stuff. So I think might be wrapping up a little bit early, but if anybody's got any questions or anything, I can't even see if there was, to be honest. But cool. Well, I appreciate y'all. So my email is Aisenbrey at Broadleaf Commerce. Email me whenever. I'm popular already. My GitHub, and then Broadleaf's Twitter. So thank y'all, everybody, and have a great thing.